Hello, and a happy Monday to you on this brand new week. Thank you so much for joining me here again this week for some more thoughts from the Bible. Please do remember to like and share and subscribe these videos so more people can find them. It's just a real privilege to be able to dig into God's Word with you again this week. So on Friday last week, I spoke about the danger of allowing fear to sway our decisions, of how fear can so easily force us away from God's best in our lives when we just respond to it to try and fix whatever situation it is that's making us fearful. I'll put a link in the description below to that video if you missed it. Um, well, after reading about King Jeroboam and how his fear prompted him to create false idols to worship and try and keep his kingdom together, I was all the more struck by another king, a man named Abijah, the son of Rehoboam and king of the nation of Judah. So at this time, the nations of Israel and Judah were actually at war with each other. And the Bible tells us that Abijah went into battle with an army of 400,000 men. Sounds like a pretty good force until you hear that against him, Jeroboam, the current king of Israel, drew his battle line with double that number. He had 800,000 men at his disposal. The odds did not look good for Abijah. And to make matters worse, Jeroboam had secretly sent some of his force around to the back of Abijah's troops to spring an ambush there and even more decisively destroy them. The Bible describes a scene in 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verses 14 to 16. Judah turned and saw that they were being attacked at both the front and the rear. Then they cried out to the Lord. The priests blew their trumpets, and the men of Judah raised the battle cry. At the sound of their battle cry, God rooted Jeroboam and all Israel before Abijah and Judah. The Israelites fled before Judah, and God delivered them into their hands. The victory was so overwhelming in Judah's favor that there were 500,000 casualties amongst Israel's army. That is more than the entire force that Abijah had to fight with. Verse 18 of that same passage, it tells us that the people of Judah were victorious because they relied on the Lord, the God of their ancestors. Their victory came not because they had superior numbers, not because they had superior skill. Their victory came because they cried out to God rather than crying out in fear. Just try to imagine how this army must have been feeling. So often in these stories in the Bible, we don't really get any sense of the emotion of the people, of the characters that we're reading about. But they were human, and so like us, they must have been scared. Can you imagine you're in this much, much smaller army and suddenly you realize you're surrounded? They must have felt overwhelmed. They would have looked at the army that was attacking and felt that defeat was inevitable, that it was sure. And I'm sure we've all been there in some situation in our lives. Maybe you're there right now. Maybe your situation in the midst of this virus, this pandemic, has deteriorated. Maybe you've lost work or lost a job or lost a loved one. You may be looking at the situation and saying, this is hopeless. There is nothing I can do here. The odds aren't just against me, they are astronomical. There is nothing I can possibly do to change the situation that I find myself in. I simply cannot win. I think that's how the people of Judah must have felt. And yet, before they had won, while the odds were still massively against them, they started to shout. And I think it probably started with one or two people, maybe one or two of the leaders. They heard the trumpet sound, a reminder of God's presence with God's people, and a shout began in the throats of a couple of people who stood up and said, "This might look impossible, but with God, all things are possible." Then maybe some more people around them started to pick up the shout until 400,000 men were screaming out their victory cry. The warriors of Israel suddenly halt in their charge, like, what is happening here? What has changed? God is moving against us. The God of our ancestors is fighting, and we are on the wrong side. In terror, they throw down their weapons and they start to flee. And God himself delivers this vast force, this far superior army, into the hands of Abijah and the men of Judah. And we have no more details. We're not given a rundown into how this battle went. All we know is that God routed all of Israel at this great shout of triumph. When the odds were stacked against them, the people of Judah's faith rose and God responded. Let that be an encouragement to you today. Whatever your situation, whatever your circumstances, no matter how sure defeat may seem, God is more powerful than what you are facing today. You can declare your victory because God is already on the scene. He is already in the battle. He is fighting for us and winning us victory when defeat seems inevitable. Securing our futures, even when the ground that we're standing on seems like sinking sand. You can shout your victory cry because God is on your side. And more than that, you don't know who your cry is going to inspire. Those men who started to shout their victory inspired 400,000 people to shout to cry out to God in their situation. And your cry of faith in your battle, in odds that seem ridiculous, may inspire other people to stand and shout as well, to let their faith rise. Your faith can be an inspiration to the people around you. Just imagine your whole church, your whole community standing up and shouting for victory in Jesus Christ. God is on your side. In every situation in our lives, in almost every day of these lives that we live, we have the choice between surrendering to fear or looking to our God. Do the latter. It is a far, far, far better option. Thank you so much for joining me here again today for these thoughts from the Bible. We're going to continue looking into this Old Testament section of Kings and Chronicles to see what lessons we can learn in the rest of the videos this week. So do join me again on Wednesday and Friday for some more. I'll see you then.